So this morning, we're going to dive back in, and it was actually the series that we've been in was supposed to end this week, but I just can't stop myself. We're going to have 2 more weeks, so this is the next to last week. Next week we'll end. It's been, for me, it's been very, whenever I'm teaching, I'm sharing with you things that I'm learning too. So it's not like I possess this great wealth of information or knowledge. I'm learning along the way as well, and it's just been great to study and act and to understand what Paul is going through and learning, and just to get a sense of how his letters fit his travels and what all that means to us. But we're going to jump in just a second. But before we do that, I would love it if for about 30 seconds we just took a deep breath and we just presented ourselves before God. We just were quiet. And if there are burdens that we brought in here, that we could just take a moment and just say to God, I really would love it if you would just take this from me. I really would just love it if in this place I could, for the next 30 minutes, be fully present to you and hear what you have for me, experience what it is that you want for me to know, what to do. If we could just take 30 seconds to do that, catch our breaths, and then I'll pray, and we'll jump in. Father, we are grateful to be together in this place. And for some of us, it took a lot to get here. I pray that whatever energy it took for us to arrive in this place, that none of it would be in vain. And I ask now in these moments that remain that as you continue to move in our midst, that you would speak to our hearts. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be pleasing to you, my rock and my redeemer. Meet us in this place. Christ we pray. So this morning as we're beginning, what I want you to know is that there is a singular image that I'm going to want you to keep in mind today. That is the image of a garden. Okay? Now, I'm probably the wrong person to speak about this particular image because I don't know a whole lot about gardening. But I'm going to give it my best shot because I think it matches with what I want to say to you today. Now, there are a bunch of tools that are up here on this table. I probably couldn't tell you the name of any of them, but I've been told that these are gardening tools, right? And so they're up here. I've got some gloves that are up here. This, I think, goes on a hose. These trim, I believe. These are all implements or tools that are used for gardening, okay? And usually when you're planting something in your garden, you will start, for those of you who are familiar, you will start when do you plant things in your garden? In the springtime. So April, May, June, whatever. So what I want you to think about is, in the beginning, there is a lot of work that needs to be done if in the end you're going to harvest whatever it is that you planted, okay? So you have the beginning stages, you have the spring, and so that's on one side. Now on the other side, if you're fortunate and you do a great job, you will have fruits, vegetables, whatever, some nice peppers, carrots, broccoli, cabbage, cucumber, whatever. If you do the work, there's a great possibility, if you have some idea as to what you're doing, that somewhere in the fall, right, that you will begin to harvest whatever it is that you planted. So between June and September, there is what? never get this by accident. There is no way. Between working hard and harvesting what it is that you desire, there is intentionality, there is work, there is labor. And for those of you who do gardening, you will know that if you plant with good intentions, but then you don't do much in the end of June, July, August, pre-September, that there's a number of things that can happen, right? If you take your eye off of what it is that you're doing, it's very possible that your crops can get infected or infested. Maybe caterpillars get in your tomatoes, right, and ruin them. Or along about July, when it hasn't rained for 3 weeks, it's very possible that the scorching sun could dry up what it is if there is no intentional watering of what you planted, correct? Or if you watered, but you haven't really tended to the garden extremely well, there are things that could grow up that you really didn't intend to grow up. And those would be what? You don't have to try hard for weeds to grow up, do you? They grow up automatically. You have to work hard so that weeds don't choke out your peppers, your broccoli, your carrots, etc., right? So here's what I want you to know as we're getting started. There is great intentionality that is required if the seed that you are planting, you hope to spring up into something fruitful. And if you are not intentional, what will happen is that you will never reap a harvest. It is impossible. And so this is the image or metaphor that I want to use, because this is the image and metaphor that I want to speak about when I talk about our lives and growing. Because maturing doesn't happen by accident. Did you know that it is very difficult in life to grow joy if you're not intentional about what requires for joy to be born? Same thing with peace, same thing with faith, same thing with hope. You don't just grow up on accident. We grow because there is intention, because there is energy, because there is hard work. Now what we would like to happen is, we would like to just do a couple of things that we think are good, pray and ask God to bring those things about, and magically, mysteriously, when we wake up the next day, those of us who are sour and bitter and angry and fearful just all of a sudden not have any of that in our lives anymore. But it doesn't work like that, does it? I wish it worked like that. That'd be great, wouldn't it? If you were just like a person who was fearful for your whole life. You didn't even know why. You couldn't even really trace the roots back. But every time you got ready to take a step forward in faith, you just froze. You were paralyzed because you were afraid. Afraid of any number of different things. But wouldn't it be great if one day you just went to bed and in your bedtime prayers you prayed, God, I'm so tired of being afraid. Would you just take that from me? Would you replace it with just like this monumental amount of faith? Wouldn't it be great if you just woke up in the morning and you had it? It'd be great. But what I have found in my life is that God gives us opportunities to grow faith by being in positions where we have to exercise it. It's kind of like going to the gym. You don't exercise the muscle doesn't grow. So there is, between the work in June and the harvest in September, there's a gap. And what you do in between will determine whether you have this or this. Okay? So this is a metaphor or a picture for your life. If you have a Bible and you want, let's turn to Acts chapter 20. We're going to catch Paul as he moves towards the conclusion of his third missionary journey. Now the first few verses that I'm going to read to you will sound extremely boring. They will. If you're reading your Bible and you read the first part of Acts chapter 20, you're just going to read it and you're just going to skip by, because there's nothing really exciting, interesting, or titillating unless you know exactly what's happening. So what I want to do is kind of fill in just a little bit of the blanks here for you in the hopes that we'll make some practical application as we go along. Now, do you remember last week when we were at Ephesus? Some of you guys weren't here, but last week when we were in Ephesus, which is right around here, I can't find it, but this is about where it is. At the end of the time that we were talking, there was a major uproar. There was a riot. And the amphitheater was filled to capacity, almost 25,000 people. They wouldn't let the Apostle Paul go in because they were afraid that he was going to be killed, ripped to pieces. So basically, I don't want to retell the whole story, but he was spared from going in and experiencing this riot. And then shortly thereafter, he is going to leave. And he's going to leave this place. He's been here for how long? Do you remember? 3 years. And day after day after day after day, he's been teaching in this rented place. And it says, all of the Jews and the Gentiles in the region had heard him. They were familiar with his teaching. So he's going to move on. Now, if he's here, does anybody know where his intended destination is? Do you know where he's wanting to finish up? You know where he wants to go? He's here. He wants to go down to Jerusalem here. Now this seems to be what should be the straight path, right? If I want to get here, if I want to go south and east, it seems pretty simple the direction I chart. Where is Paul going to go? North and west. He's here. He's going to go back up here to Macedonia. So he wants to go south and east, but he's going to go north and west. He's going to appear to be directionally challenged. But there's some work that needs to happen, and we're going to understand as we follow his journey, okay? So Acts chapter 20, beginning in verse 1. Now when the uproar was over, Paul sent for the believers, and he encouraged them, and then he said goodbye, and he left for Macedonia, northern Greece, okay? Philippi, Thessalonica, Berea, right in here. This is where he's headed, okay? Now while there, he encouraged the believers in all the towns he passed through. And then he traveled down to Greece, where he stayed for 3 months. Now I want to stop there for just a moment, okay? Now he's eventually headed down to Corinth. He spent some time up in the northern part of Greece, in Macedonia area. Does anybody remember how long it was that since he had been here? This would be great. If you know this, like, I'm going to give you the Bible and you can come up and teach the rest. Because you've been paying attention. Do you know how long it's been since he was in Macedonia? Just guess.
4 years.
Very, very close. 5 years. Now, why is he going back when his intended destination is south and east? Why is he going north and west? You know why?
Get rid of the weeds.
Because he put plants in the ground 5 years previous. And he's going back to tend to what he initially planted. He's going to nurture that. This isn't the first time. This is the 3rd time he will have been there. He's done this over and over and over. This isn't where he was really intending to go, but he couldn't help himself because he was so concerned with their spiritual well-being that he said, it is worth a detour for me to head north and west, even if that's not my intended destination. I love these people. I care about their life. I want them to be well. So he goes up to pull weeds and water his crop. Okay? Because he wants to see a harvest in Macedonia. Okay? Now this is going to come at great expense. This is not only just like out of the way. This is like hard work. Listen to what he writes. He's going to go from Macedonia to Corinth. And he's going to stay for 3 months. When he was in Ephesus, just before here, he wrote a couple of letters to the Corinthian church. I want you to hear what he says about this whole process, okay? This is very important. 2 Corinthians chapter 11. He says, I have worked harder and been put in prison more often. I've been whipped times without number and faced death again and again. 5 different times the Jewish leaders gave me 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. Once I spent a whole night and day adrift at sea. I've traveled on many long journeys. I've faced dangers from rivers and from robbers. I've faced dangers from my own people, the Jews, as well as the Gentiles. I've faced dangers in the cities and in the deserts and on the seas. And I've faced danger from men who claim to be believers but are not. I've worked hard and long, enduring many sleepless nights. I've been hungry and thirsty, and I've often gone without food. I have shivered in the cold without enough clothing to keep me warm. And then, besides all this, I have the daily burden of my concern for all the churches. Who is weak without my feeling their weakness? Who is led astray, and I do not burn with anger? Do you get the sense that, like, Paul is just committed no matter what's going to happen? I mean, wherever he is and whoever he encounters and whatever goes on, he is willing to continue on. He's not going to give up easy. Now, somewhere along the third or fourth time I was lashed 39 times, I might be having second thoughts about my travels. Wouldn't you? How many times do you need to be shipwrecked or set adrift at sea or in danger from robbers? How many times do you need to be spent out in the desert with bandits chasing after you? How often do your own people need to turn on you before it is that you say, forget this, this isn't worth it. I'm going to go find a condo in the mountains and just chill out for a year so that I can repair and be ready to move in a different direction. But he doesn't do that. This is intense. He writes this letter to the people that he's just getting ready to visit. And if you think about it, you understand that there's a lot of hard, inconvenient, and even painful work that requires getting you from June to September. Now, how is it, I just want to ask you for a moment, how is it that you think that you're supposed to grow joy in your life when you're totally depressed? When you're totally negative about the road you're on. You just think, every time I turn to do this, something happens. And this is one thing after another, after another. Or how is it that you're supposed to grow peace when all there is chaos in your life? Is God just supposed to, boom, give this to you because you asked for it? How is it that I'm supposed to get from June to September if there's no intentionality on my part? If there's no inconvenience, if there's no hard work, if there's no rolling up my sleeves and partnering with God and pulling the weeds and planting a crop that I hope to see harvested? And so, as we think about Paul's destination being south and east and him headed north and west, I just want to ask you this. How intentional are you these days with growing the garden of your own soul? How intentional are you these days with developing the kind of character that you hoped you one day would have when you were growing up and still had all of those dreams? What kind of weeds are growing in your garden? And do you want them to be there forever, choking out the life that it is that you desire to have? I mean, there's stuff, if we don't pay attention, that's going to grow up over time, and it's going to choke the life out of us. And some of us are already experiencing that. Some of us are so bitter and so angry about stuff that's been done to us that we couldn't control, and that wasn't our fault. Some of us are so afraid just to take the next step because we think if we take the next step, it's only going to make things worse. Some of us got stuff that's deep-rooted and it's choking the life out of us. It's choking the life out of what it is that we want, what it is that we hope, what it is that we know that God wants for us. So I want you, just as we're moving along with Paul, I just want you to ask yourself, what is the condition of my garden these days? Really, honestly. And this is something that I only want you to think about. This isn't something you need to share with anybody. I just want you to think about this. And as you're thinking about it, I just want you to talk with God about this. Making excuses about why it is that you are where you are is not going to help. blaming other people, not going to help. You can do that. It's a strategy to push off and to blame others, to blame God, to be angry, to stay afraid, to be jealous, to be prideful. You can do those things if you feel like that's the life you want. But I just want you to think, as we're moving with Paul in the opposite direction, I want you to think about your own life, your own soul, your own character. Now, after he goes from Macedonia, he's going to go down to Corinth, and he's going to spend the winter there. Because he can't travel. The shipping lanes aren't open during the winter, so he's going to stay for 3 months in Corinth. Now, previously, when he was in Corinth, do you remember how long he stayed? The last time he was there? It was like a long time, not quite as long as he was in Ephesus. Do you remember how long he was on a second missionary journey?
2 years.
Almost. He was there for 18 months. Corinth was a very strategic place in Greece, right? East and west, it controlled basically the travel by sea, and north and south by foot. It was a very, very, very strategic place. It was a very happening place. But it was a very troubled place. And I think the reason that he spent 18 months in Corinth was because the soil was that rocky, it was that rough, it required that much work. I don't know whether you remember in Corinth, but there was a lot of immorality that was extremely rampant. I mean, there was sexual promiscuity, there was idol worship, there was division among the believers. There was so much stuff that was going on that it was very troublesome. I think Paul just needed 18 months to get the soil right to plant the seed. Well, anyway, he's going back to Corinth, and I want us to pick up the story when he moves his way back there, okay? Then he traveled down to Greece, where he stayed for 3 months. He was preparing to sail back to Syria when he discovered a plot by some Jews against his life. So he decided to return through Macedonia. All right? So he goes down there. He's going to stay for 3 months. He's going to get in his boat. Right? He's here. He's going to go back over here and eventually down here. But when he gets to Centuria, which is like a port city, getting ready to sail, he discovers what? That some people are going to kill him. Right? This is one more threat or attempt on his life. So what does he do? He goes back up this way, again through Macedonia. By the way, when he's finished, 450 miles on foot. Okay, this is like going from here to almost Bar Harbor, Maine on foot. Raleigh, North Carolina on foot. Okay, he's 60 years old. There are no paved roads. He has no car. Okay, you get the deal here? He's also going to be going back up through a mountainous region, okay? So over hill, over dale, 450 miles back up. His life has been threatened once again. So he decides, well, might as well make the most of it. I'll go back and check my plants, my crops again, see how they're doing. And eventually he's going to wind up back here in Asia. Now, he's been to this place I'm going to describe to you 3 times previously. We haven't talked about it, but this is going to be his 3rd time. Why? Same reason. He's checking on his peeps. He wants to know that they're doing okay. That they're not stuck. That they're not in the same place they were when he left them. I mean, because how bad is it that after 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, you're still in the exact same place that you were 5 years previous? That's discouraging, isn't it? Do you want to forever be stuck? I don't want to forever be stuck. So Paul is going back, and he knows that it requires intention. Right? For the harvest to spring up, it requires intention. It is not convenient, and it is hard. His life has been threatened. I think I'll just take a 450-mile walk and go back and see what these guys are up to. I mean, really. It's unbelievable. So as he makes that walk, listen to how the story continues. Several men were traveling with him. They were Sopater, son of Pyrrhus from Berea, Aristarchus and Secundus from Thessalonica, Gaius from Derbe. We're glad he's there. He was about ripped to shreds in that riot. Timothy and Tychicus and Trophimus from the province of Asia. And they went on ahead, and they waited for us at Troas. After the Passover ended, we boarded a ship at Philippi in Macedonia, and 5 days later we joined them in Troas, where we stayed for a week. Now, why were all those guys with him? Does anybody know? On his first missionary journey, there were 2. On the second missionary journey, there were 3. On this third missionary journey, there are 9. Okay, so he's getting more and more company. Do you know why they were with him? Anybody have any idea why all these folks were with him? Perhaps. I mean, it's certainly strength in numbers. It's nice to have some buddies when your life is threatened all the time, right? It's nice to have a posse. So here's what he's been doing. The church of Jerusalem, where he's headed, they've been ravaged by famine. And he's been going from town to town, church to church, taking up an offering from the Gentiles to give to the Jews. Now, for the longest of time, the Jews wanted nothing to do with the Gentiles. They didn't want them a part of their church. So what is he doing? He's going to the Gentile churches, and he's appealing on behalf of the Jewish brethren, saying, these guys are in terrible shape. Could you give a little bit of money and help them? And so what they're doing is, every person who's with them brings a bag from the town that they're from of money. To give Paul all of his money by himself would be very unwise and unsafe. So they've got like the Brinks truck. They've got all their bags of money, and they're making their way eventually to get to Jerusalem. Paul is trying to build a bridge between the Jews and the Gentiles. And he thinks it will help if when the Gentiles come, they can tell the story about why their church would give money to the Jews there in Jerusalem when they don't know them, hadn't seen them, and had really nothing much to do with them other than being rejected to them. He thinks it will build bridges, and it will. So he's got a bunch of guys with him who are taking money to get to Jerusalem. Well, they arrive in Troas, and as the story continues, this is like really one of the funniest stories. This is the story we'll end with. So it says, on the first day of the week, we gathered with the local believers to share in the Lord's Supper. Paul was preaching to them, and since he was leaving the next day, he kept talking until midnight. Do you believe like a preacher would talk until midnight? On and on and on. Listen to what it says. The upstairs room where we met was lighted with many flickering lamps. As Paul spoke on and on and on, a young man named Eutychus was sitting on the windowsill, and he became very drowsy. Finally, he fell asleep, and he dropped 3 stories to his death below. You know what the moral of this story is? Don't fall asleep in church, and bad things will happen. Right? So he's talking on and on and on and on. So much so that he literally like kills the guy. The guy can't take it. He falls asleep and falls to his death, right? Now, why is Paul doing this? I mean, he can see that half his congregation with the flickering light, that they're asleep. They've lost interest. They're no longer with him. Why is he doing this? Sometimes I ask myself that. He's doing this because this is the very last time he's going to be with them. It's like he's got so much to say, but he knows he's never coming back. And he's just desperate to fill him with as much as he can give him. Because this is it. This is it for him. He's been there 3 times, he will never come back again. And so he knows they're tired. He knows they're weary. But he's just hoping, like every good preacher hopes, if I just say it one more different way, if I just put it another way, that maybe somehow it's going to sink in. So that's enough to like cause him to stop, you would think, right? Let's continue to finish the story. Paul went down, bent over him, and took him into his arms, and he said, "Don't worry, he's alive." And he was. And then they all went back upstairs. They shared in the Lord's Supper, and they ate together. And Paul continued talking to them until dawn, and then he left. And meanwhile, the young man was taken home unhurt, and everyone was greatly relieved. So the guy falls to his death. By the way, does anybody know what Eutychus means? His name? It means lucky. Or fortunate one. So he goes down, he picks him up, he says whatever he says, and he's alive. They prayed over him, breathed on him, asked God for help. Now I want to know, by the time that the guy falls to his death and the time that Paul reaches him, what has to be going through his head? God, why couldn't I just stop a little bit sooner? The guy's dead. He gets down there and he looks at him, and whatever transaction happens, he says, no problem, he's alive. So everybody's totally freaked out, like this is amazing, right? So you would think that's a good way, that's a perfect way to close your sermon. A nice resurrection, that would be great. Could you say anything else that would top that? But he has to keep trying. It says he continued, they went up and took the Lord's Supper, and he continued on until the morning. Oh my goodness. Wow. That's a great story, right? It's a great story, but it comes out of a place of desperation for Paul. He knows it's the end. He knows it's the last time he's going to see him. And he is so concerned for their spiritual well-being. And here's what I want to say as we move to close. How concerned are you for your own spiritual well-being? I mean, I look at this guy and I see how concerned he was for everybody else's spiritual well-being. He's traveling on foot thousands of miles on sea. He's being exposed to all these dangers. All these things are happening to him. He could have easily just stopped and did something different. But he knew between June and September that there was some hard work that was going to be required if what he wanted to see was actually ever going to be brought into its fruition. And I just want to say to you, how concerned are you about the current condition of your own garden? Like if I were to ask you, if you were to be honest and you were to describe the contents of your character and of your soul, what is it that's growing these days inside of you? And is the stuff that's growing inside you the stuff you want to be growing inside of you? I mean, does it look more like that or like that? Because truthfully, it's a lot easier to grow that than it is to grow that, isn't it? I mean, that doesn't take much at all. Just let things take their natural course. So, like, if I were to ask you for what remains of the rest of this year, if I would ask you, what is it that you'd most like to see grow up in your life? Like, maybe it's joy. Maybe you say, I can't even remember the last time I felt joy. There's a period in my life that I would honestly say that I couldn't remember the last time that I literally felt joy in my life. What if you could be at your best when things are at their worst? Wouldn't that be a great fruit to be born in your life? Did you know that, like, the circumstances of your life are not what produces joy? I don't know whether you do that or not, but it's true. It's not the circumstances or the situations in our lives that produce the fruit we desire or thwart it. It's our responses to those situations. So if I were to ask you, if you want to see joy grow up, what is it that you are doing to plant and cultivate joy? Or what about gratitude? What about if you're just not a grateful person? Like you always want what somebody else has. You're never content with what it is that you have. Possess. You look at somebody's life and you say, gosh, they have it so much easier than I do. I wish for a second, a day, I could have their life. What would it be like if you just weren't jealous anymore? If you pulled that weed and you just said, you know what, for better or for worse, what I have is what I have. Let me cultivate gratitude. Do you know how you cultivate gratitude in your life? By choosing to be thankful for for what you have. You know, at every turn, when you wished you had something else, it makes you more and more and more miserable and dissatisfied. Or suppose pride is an issue for you. Like, what are you doing to root out the weed of pride in your life? There are things that spring up naturally. It doesn't take all that much work. What is it that you are doing intentionally? It's not convenient, and it is sometimes hard and even painful to pull the weeds and to nurture the garden. But what is growing up in you? What are the things that we have become so addicted to that take the place of God's good work in our lives? The things that we rely on and trust that will bring us peace or comfort or control. So what I want to ask you is, Paul seems to me, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, Paul seems to me to be bent on nurturing the character and the souls and the lives of those that he began that good work in. And he goes to great lengths. What lengths are you going to develop and nurture your own character and personal and spiritual well-being? Do you know how you grow faith? You know, like sometimes you're just thinking to yourself, like, why do all these terrible things keep happening to me? Right? Does anybody ever feel like that? Like, I just can't catch a break. Like one moment it's this, and just about the time I'm back to my feet, then it's this. And then it's this, and then it's this. Do you know how you grow faith? You grow faith like you grow your biceps. You exercise the muscle. So God is constantly giving us opportunities to trust or to extend faith. But more often than not, what many of us like to do is try and control the situation we find ourselves in to the intended desire that we have. And you know, when you're trying to control something to a place where you're taking it out of God's hands to another place, what it does is it wrecks the possibility for intimacy in the relationship you have with God. And there can be no trust with control. How could I possibly trust you if I'm always trying to control you? What trying to control someone shows is that you have no trust at all. Is that you're refusing to extend faith. People want to have mature faith. They just don't ever want to have to be in a situation where they have to exercise it. And if you don't exercise your faith, guess what? It atrophies. It shrinks, it shrivels, it dies. And you wonder, why do I not have any more faith than I do? Well, God just keeps giving you the opportunities to extend it. But all you keep really wanting to do is control it to a different desired result. Real growth happens when in partnership with God, you decide you have a real part to play. You don't make excuses for why things are the way they are. You don't blame other people. Why? Because it's a waste of time. If you were to tell me that it would be helpful to blame others and make excuses, it would be helpful to produce the harvest, I would say go right ahead. Do it as much as you want. Do it often. But I'm telling you, it is counter. It is the antithesis of what will produce this. You say, yeah, but you don't understand. I probably don't understand. And I probably won't understand what's going on in your personal world. I can only say this. I have spent a good portion of my life trying to understand the futility of blaming other people for stuff that's wrong in my life. For making excuses about why I'm not where I should be or who I should be. I'm telling you from my own experience the futility of making excuses and blaming others. It does not help me, you, us get to the place we really want to go. So if this is what you want to grow in your soul, nice, fresh vegetables, good, fresh fruit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. If you'd like to see these things grow up, somewhere between June and September, there's some work to do. How committed are you to reaping a harvest in your own life? I'd say Paul was supremely committed. How committed are you? Because you know what? With a little bit of work and a whole lot of grace, there's amazing things that are possible for you. You don't always have to be who you've been. And you don't always have to stay where you are. It can be different. It can be better. But it's going to require something from you. Are you willing to do the work to get you to the place that you want to go? That really ultimately is the question. And that's what I want you to think about as we go. Lord, even in the boring places of Scripture, we can learn stuff. There's so much stuff for us to learn. There's so many areas of our life that need attention, that we desire growth in. And I just ask today, as we finish this time of looking at your word, that you would, that the seed of something good would have been planted in us, that over time we will care enough to nurture. That one day, what we have sown, we will reap. God, I'm trusting that in that process, as we work hard, that you're with us and that you're for us. And that, God, ultimately, you will determine the yield. I thank you for this day. Continue to grow us, Lord. Continue to teach us. Continue to show us what we need to see. That we may honor you with our lives and bless the world as we live into the fullest. In Christ we pray. Amen. Hey, listen, let me share one final passage.